Why does the world mourn Palestinian deaths but stay silent when Jews are butchered? Why do hostage posters enrage people, not at the kidnappers, but at the victims? Melanie Phillips exposes a truth the world refuses to face. Stay to the end and comment below.
To the modern amoral, post-moral, post-religious mind, the only thing that matters is dead Palestinian Arabs. If you say to them, well, they're dead because they've been killed because Hamas used them as human shields. They're killed by Israeli ordnance because the Israelis have to do this to protect themselves and defend themselves because they are under attack and because the Hamas started this. The Hamas are the aggressors. Israel is the victim. In a just war, which is what this is, people have to, unfortunately, sometimes go to war to prevent the innocent, more of the innocent, being killed. And in a just war, unfortunately, there are innocents on the other side being killed. But in order to prevent the bigger horror, which is, in this case, attempted genocide, one has to have a just war. None of that washes because the only thing that matters is dead Palestinian Arabs. The idea that people behave in a way for which they have to pay a price, that they must take responsibility for that, that there is a difference between aggression and defense, no.
Why? Why do they care about dead Palestinian Arabs, which you and I both do also? Neither of us take any pleasure in those horrible sights. Why do they care about that, but they don't care about the victims of the Otef, of the Gaza envelope? Why do they care about that, but they don't care about how many people the United States killed in Mosul, or how many innocent Germans the Allies killed during the Second World War? Why has the Palestinian victim become sort of a different category unto itself?
Well, I think there are many reasons for that. Partly it's what I've just been saying, that what matters is that these people are wretched and poor and defenseless
So it's the
because,
oppressor-oppressed binary?
yes, it's the oppressor-oppressed binary. Because Israel has the weaponry it has, and because it's backed by America, then according to this, what I would say is a Marxist-based distinction between the powerful and the powerless, Israel has the power, therefore, as a powerful entity, it can never be in the right. And the Palestinian Arabs are powerless because they don't have these weapons, and therefore, as a powerless entity, they can never be in the wrong. So the idea that the Palestinian Arabs actually are trying to commit genocide, don't be ridiculous, it's the Israelis who are committing genocide. That's the first thing. The second thing, which is, I think, an even harder thing to swallow, is that this kind of person in the West does not recognize Israeli victims because Israeli victims, or rather Jewish victims, get in the way of the narrative. The narrative is one of Israeli power and oppression, Palestinian Arab powerlessness and victimization. And if you have a situation as you had on October 7, where you have the powerless Palestinian Arabs behaving not just in a murderous, but in a depraved and barbaric fashion, that cannot have happened. It simply cannot have happened. And then there's a third point, which is even worse, an even more difficult point, I think, for us to internalize because it's so horrible, which is that the idea of the Jewish victim just has to be written out completely because people cannot deal and do not want to deal with the Jew as victim because to them, Jews in the world are all powerful, not just Israel. Jews in the world are all powerful. And Jews in the world are a nuisance. Jews in the world mean conscience. Conscience gets in the way of what I want to do, I as a Western person. And consequently, you have to sort of get rid of all this. And also, conscience brings guilt. And when we look at the Jews as the West, when we look at the Jews, we have guilt. Okay, we weren't Nazis. But we were the West, and the West did this to them, and we can't cope with that. We cannot cope as the West with what we did to them. So we have to make it okay in our minds. So they cannot be victims ever. They can only be powerful.
And we're going to analogize them to Nazis. So we're going to somehow
so
undo the
once you
guilt that we feel.
analogize them to Nazis, then we're free.
Right.
We are free. And to me, we all saw this extraordinary monstrosity over and over again after October 7, where you had the pictures of the posters with the faces of the hostages displayed in streets around the West. And you had people tearing them down.
Including Jews on the Upper West Side, by the way.
What, tearing them down?
Yeah.
Okay, so they were tearing them down. And they were put up again, and they tore them down. And we saw them, some of them actually were videoed. And I looked at their faces. And it was an astonishing thing, because they weren't just tearing them down. Their faces were convulsed by rage. And if they were stopped, you saw this unbelievable rage. Why were they so enraged by the pictures of innocent women, children, babies, and men? Why were they so enraged? And I've thought a lot about this, and I put this in the book, and I kept coming back to it, because it seemed to me something else was going on other than just hatred of Israel, other than compassion for the Palestinians, not that I think there is any, but anyway, among these people, something else was going on to explain this rage. When they were tearing down these posters, they were tearing down the Jews out of their sight, out of their heads, out of their conscience, out of the world. They wanted the Jews torn out of their world. And I think that is why fundamentally, this is why this kind of person cannot accept Jewish victims, because they can't deal with it on a whole number of levels. It gets in the way of the narrative that they've constructed about the Middle East. Why have they constructed that narrative? Because they can't deal with Jewish victimization. They cannot deal with the fact that what the Jews of Israel have, what the Jews of pre-Israel and of Israel have been putting up with for the last 100 years. It's 100 years of basically warfare against them to exterminate the Jewish homeland. They can't deal with that. They can't deal with the fact that this is a process of extermination that's going on, and they can't deal with the fact that Jews are to them they're all present in their world. They're all present as bad things, as conscience, as stopping me doing what I want to do, as being powerful. All those things, they want us gone.